Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for this Wednesday's Wise Leader interview. We have an amazing woman on with us today who has done so many things from being an actress and an author and a psychic. So I am super excited to talk to Laura Powers today and hear about her unique and interesting journey in wise leadership. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you could join us. I would love to just dive it right in and really hear your story of your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I definitely have an unusual path. So, ever since I was little, I've seen and sensed ghosts and other beings. And I actually grew up thinking that maybe I was crazy because it was pretty clear to me from a very young age that other people weren't perceiving or sensing what I was. And so I remember, looking around and trying to see what other people were were noticing and responding to. I remember asking my mom when I think I was probably about 7 if she saw things, and I knew based on her response, she just didn't know what I was talking about. So I just thought, okay, probably best just to keep this to myself. So very much like the kid in the Sixth Sense, just kind of experiencing these things, keeping it to myself, not really knowing what it meant or what to do about it. And as I got older, my gifts really magnified, although I didn't think of them as gifts at the time. And it got to a point where it was really a challenge for me, especially nighttime was a struggle because I was just seeing and sensing so much. And then it kind of came to a peak for me when I was in college and a family friend was storing some things in my parents' garage. And he came out of the garage and he was like white faced and shaken. And this is a big guy, not a man who's easily scared. And I asked him what was wrong. And he said this ghost just walked up to me and it was really aggressive and kind of threatening. And I asked him to describe the ghost, and it was a ghost that had been bothering me. And so that was both frightening because it confirmed that this stuff was real, but also kind of comforting in a way because it meant that I wasn't mentally ill. And
Right.
so at that point, it was like, okay, great. But I still didn't really know what to do about it. So I made the decision a short time after that to try to block out my abilities.
Mm.
And I was pretty successful, at least on the surface, for a while, in the sense that I stopped seeing and sensing things at least as dramatically and proceeded to live my life very analytically, very logically, like doing all the things that you're, kind of supposed to do, husband check, house check, fancy job check, advanced degree check, all the things. And then basically it all just came tumbling down for me during the recession, and I realized my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. That fell apart. I had a contract position with the University of Washington that ended when the recession hit, and then no one was hiring. I couldn't find a job. I'd never been unemployed in my whole life. I was having health problems, just emotionally struggling. So I went to a psychic because I just was like, what do I do? Like I'm so lost. And of course, without me telling her about these different things, she said, when you shut out your abilities, you shut out your intuition, and you really need your intuition. And that made sense to me. So I basically set the intention to open back up psychically. And boy, did the floodgates open when I did. And then I immediately started taking psychic training classes, really just to manage my life at this point. Like it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a psychic. I was working prior to the recession in government and politics. So, you don't get much more different from a psychic than government and politics. So I just was trying to help my life, start taking classes. And as I did that, I would do practice exercises, and people started to say, wow, you're really good at this, the psychic stuff. And it just became something that I was really guided towards. And it was very hard. Probably one of the hardest things I've ever done is that sort of coming out of the psychic spiritual closet, just to own up to my abilities. And at the same time as I started opening it up, I started to reopen to my creativity. So I've always been a very creative person. As a child, I wrote songs and wrote and performed. And so it's an interesting thing that as I opened up intuition, creativity already started to flow again as well. So I started actually working as an actress while I was building my psychic business. And then I just made so much more money as a psychic that I that I switched my focus to more full time on the psychic work. And so I still love performing and creating, do a lot of channeling when I create as well. So a lot of my books are channeled. And so I write very quickly, which is why I have 8 books. And yeah, so here I am today. It's my main profession is working as a psychic and a creative entrepreneur. And I love to support and assist people to open up to their own psychic abilities, as well as give them guidance if they're feeling stuck or if they'd like to manifest new levels of, love, abundance, opportunity, etc. So yeah, it's been a wild journey, and here I am. And like I said, if you had told me a long time ago that that's what I'd be doing, I would have been really shocked. But I love what I do, and I feel very blessed to be able to make a living doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. In my book, Unleash the Wise Leader, I talk a lot about, knowing your why and knowing your purpose and finding your voice. And I think there's a lot of women out there who, exactly what you said, super successful on the outside, but really disconnected from their authentic selves. And
Absolutely.
they get caught in like this good girl syndrome, right? Go to college,
Oh
get
yeah.
married, a house, kids, corporate career, whatever it is. And they wake up at some point in life and realize they're really unhappy. And it comes from that place of disconnection. And I'm a firm believer in intuition and using that in your leadership. I think that's our inner wisdom, right? And that's
Mhm.
how you become a wise leader.
Oh, completely. And it's really interesting because, at the peak when everything kind of came to a head for me, of course, I was unhappy at that time. My marriage was falling apart. I was ill, like, couldn't find a job. But if you'd asked me about a year beforehand if I was happy, I would have said yes, and I would have thought I was happy. But when I start to experience better levels of happiness and satisfaction and passion and all of those things is when I realized, gosh, I was so miserable, but it's like I didn't even know it. And I think that happens to a lot of people who aren't aligned with their soul. They're not aligned with what their soul came here to do and wants to do. And there ends up to this kind of almost low grade depression or malaise that sits in just kind of lack of passion, unenergized, just feeling blah, no motivation to take care of yourself or do the things. And so I feel like this is actually kind of a pandemic in a way, in a different kind of pandemic in the country of people just being really not aligned. And when you're not aligned, everything falls apart. So that's what I experienced. And so if you're experiencing that with everything's falling apart, it seems really hard, but I think it's really so that it can fall together in a much better way. That when things fall apart, it's because there's something better coming if we can just reframe it and then work towards whatever it is that we're being guided to shift. But I completely agree with you with leadership. If you're not aligned, if you can't use your intuition and tap in, then you can barely lead your own life, much less, guide and support others.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My husband and I have this expression of like you could have the most beautiful, goblet or chalice, right? And it could be gorgeous. And if it's filled with mud, it's kind of worthless, right? And you have to
Um,
empty out your cup, but that's really scary and uncomfortable being in that empty place. But you can't accept the fine wine that you deserve unless you empty it out. And I think that's super scary for a lot of people when they wake up and realize they're not aligned.
yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, having gone through it myself, it was very intense and very scary. And I literally felt like I was breaking apart. I remember this one day in particular, I was just like, I feel like I'm being destroyed. I mean, that's what it felt like. And in a way, it was that ego death or whatever, like who I thought I was. And also the future I thought I was building towards was no more. And that was scary. But then the more I stepped forward into that path that I was being guided to step into, the more I realized that where I was going was so much better than what I had envisioned for myself before. And so I think it's about moving through that fear and really into that faith. And if you're being guided to shift those things, then there is something good for you on the other side of that, even if you can't see it. I mean, at that time, I had no money, I had health issues, the economy was terrible. Um, I was emotionally devastated from my divorce. Like every area of my life seemed horrible. So it seemed hard to envision something really incredible. But now, even with the pandemic, this in terms of my business, this is my best year ever. I still had some incredible experiences and opportunities. So we really can create wonderful things no matter what is happening around us. That said, if we're going through some tough times, it's usually just this kind of spiritual realignment that's happening. And the more we lean into it and the less we fight it, the smoother everything goes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many key points in what you said. And I love the Leonard Cohen quote about, the cracks let the light get in. And I
Yeah.
think you have to go through this this uncomfortable shifting process to get to the other side. And the more we do accept that, the easier it is. Sometimes we just have to sit in that uncomfortable space for a while. And I know I certainly went through that. After my second daughter was born, and she's heard me say this before, I always feel a little bit guilty, but it was like everything came apart. And I wrote an article about it called Yoga Saved My Life, because it got
Mm,
me connected and back to alignment and reignited something in me. And similar to you, unfortunately, I realized that my marriage was not healthy for either one of us and had to let
yeah.
go of that. And, I had I had babies at home. So it was a real change. But, he and I have a great friendship now. We're both remarried. We're both happier. And the girls are thriving. So something that I thought was going to be devastating for us, and at the time it was, but as you said, we came out on the other side, and we're much more in alignment with who we are now, and our gifts to share with the world.
Yeah, it is challenging. It can be very challenging when you're going through these shifts. And I think it's important to recognize too that the more we listen when we get that initial message from our intuition or the universe or whatever your beliefs are, the smoother everything goes. And then when we're real, like it's kind of like the further out of alignment we get, the louder the message gets and the harder it is. But sometimes it's like it's hard to listen initially, and it's like we don't want to believe it, or it just doesn't seem like that's right somehow, usually because of programming, some kind of programming that we have. So like you talked about checking all the boxes, and how so many women are in that place right now where they just wake up suddenly. And in retrospect, there were so many messages I got and feelings I got that I just didn't listen to earlier on, until it came to this basically like crashing into a wall. Like, you can't ignore this anymore. And so just encourage everyone to really tap into their intuition, learn about it, because it just makes the journey easier. Um, but even if it's gotten to that really hard place, it can get better and very quickly. Like, once I acknowledged my intuition and started paying attention, things got dramatically better and so fast. And so it was, in a way, it was like this other way in terms of my life kind of gradually declining is I think what happens. Like, it was like off course, gradually just getting kind of adrift. And then it was like realignment, bam, and it was like fast. And so even if you seem like you're really far off track or you're just having a really hard time, things can change for the better incredibly quickly and dramatically if you don't fight it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the old phrase, what we resist persists. And
Yes.
the harder we push against it, everything does get harder. It's like trying to swim upstream instead of going with the current. But I think a lot of people, they're not used to listening to their intuition. And so they doubt it. They're like, oh, that's nothing. And like you said, they lean into logic, and there's nothing wrong with logic, right? We have to be balanced, but they lose this trust in their intuition, which is really their inner guidance system.
Yeah, and we've been in this kind of hyper, sort of stereotypically male, logical, analytical, process oriented system for so long. And I'm really feeling a realignment happening for the whole world right now. And in order to come in balance, it's like we swung so far in one direction, we kind of need to swing back, you know, pretty extreme into the other direction. So that's what I did, is I was like, whoa, full on psychic immersion. Like, that's because that's what I needed the most work on. And then I think you find this balance, and then you can acknowledge and understand the logic and the process and all of that. But so many people have been so far into that other side that they have to go pretty hard into the feminine, intuitive, empathic aspect in order to balance themselves for a while. And it's really interesting because I teach psychic training classes, and I've been doing that for years, like pretty much since I started in this work. And all of a sudden it's like there's such a hunger for it. Like my classes are so much fuller. People are asking about it. I'm doing longer term programs because people, I think, are finally recognizing like this is a big deal. This is important.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a good point about, masculine versus feminine leadership. And one of the things I emphasize in the book is really allowing your feminine leadership through. So many of us have learned leadership from men, and how it's been modeled in society, on TV, our parents, all of these things. And we think that we have to tamp down our femininity if we want to be leaders. But I think our femininity is the key to our leadership.
Yeah, and from my perspective as a psychic, this is so much deeper than even just what we're taught. Like I have had a lot more male lives than female lives, in terms of past lives. And basically on a soul level, it's like, okay, it's time for you to access that other side of yourself. And I feel like that's happening on a world scale where we're like the whole world, and then individually and collectively, it's like, okay, we need to get back into balance and acknowledge this part. And and if we don't, then that's when we have a lot of struggle.
Yeah, I think that all the turmoil that we've been seeing in the world, is that emptying of the cup, right? It is
Yeah.
that things have to get rocky sometimes in order to have this shift and in order to have this communal shift. But I think it really is an awakening that, that things do need to shift, and I think part of that shift is swinging more into the feminine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other piece is that we're so taught, is something practical? Does it make sense? But when we're aligned or not aligned, that's almost everything in a way. It doesn't matter whether on the surface or whether society analyzes something to be practical for you. If it's aligned for your soul, it's practical in a way,
Mm.
right? So you
Yeah.
could be doing all the practical things, and if it's not aligned for you, you won't find success. And if you are doing something that is aligned for you with your soul path and purpose, it could be super impractical in traditional metrics, and it's going to be amazing for you. So that's why it's so important to not have these hard and fast rules about what is smart or not smart to do. Because if you came in here to be a singer, or if you came in here to be a speaker, or if you came in here to be a healer, I mean, that's what's aligned for you. And then things can really, unfold for you, and have a lot of flow in this really beautiful way. And then the things that you're kind of taught to do, you may hit a lot of struggle. So that's what happened with me. I was doing like all the things that I was taught to do, and I don't even think it was a conscious choice. It was more like, yeah, this is just what you do. It's not like I was even consciously being like, I'm doing that because that's what I've been told to do. It was more just kind of how I felt that it unfolded. But it really was about choice, an unconscious choice. And now I'm a lot more conscious and aware, and creating. Because once you tap into your intuition, I think the beauty of it is you learn the lessons, you learn what you're being guided to do, but at the same time, you also learn the tools to manifest and create, what you want within the sort of framework, as long as you're paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I want to hear more about your business. Like, how do you use your psychic abilities to help people, and how do you teach that to somebody else?
Sure. So in terms of helping people, I do all kinds of stuff as a psychic. So, from animal communication and mediumship, communicating with spirits on the other side as a whole, to looking at, what's happening in a person's body, looking at their diet, and, just what's going to help them kind of physically perform better, to looking at relationships, dynamics in relationships, what's happening, is that aligned, did you have past lives with that person, or the dynamics in the past lives. When you look at past lives, it's always very informative to what's happening in the present. And then I actually work a lot with business owners, using my abilities for business. So a
Wow.
lot of people think of the psychic realm as like this, okay, it's just a spiritual thing on the side. I'm like, business and money is super spiritual, so we don't have to have these separate. So I work a lot with business owners, executives, and I do a lot of regular consulting with clients, where we might talk every month, couple of weeks, every week, if there's, a lot going on, to just really check in on what's happening. And it can go into like very specific situations, to kind of overall what needs to shift, to clear an obstacle, achieve a goal or vision. So yeah, my work is kind of all over the board, but I love it because it's always changing. And also when people listen and connect, really incredible changes happen in lives and in business. So I love that aspect. And then in terms of psychic training, I basically help people understand, first of all, the different ways that psychic abilities can manifest, because there's many different abilities, from clairvoyance, which is seeing. So I have that. There's clairaudience, hearing. There's the empathic sense or clairsentience, where you feel in your body. There's claircognizance, where you know, and there's a whole bunch of others, but those are some of the main ones. So how do you operate? Like, how are you receiving information? And then practicing those tools and giving validation and confirmation and guiding someone during that learning process. So I do private training, and then I also do group classes as well. And those are always, the group classes are so fun because people have a lot of realizations, and it's just a fun thing to exercise. And I think, what a different world would we be in if we had kind of the psychic ABCs when we were growing up. Really, like, I would love to see that happen, in my lifetime, where this is a standard thing. I know my life would have unfolded very differently if I'd learned to pay attention and to listen to my soul and the intuitive messages that I was getting early on, instead of having this, painful and very dramatic kind of crash in my life where I had to kind of
Right, right.
start over. So and also, I think there's a misconception that you're either psychic or you're not. And I don't think that's the case. I do think there's some people like myself where we have really strong abilities, and I literally couldn't ignore it. And I think part of that is because it is meant to be part of my soul path and purpose. Like, it's so strong for a reason. But everyone has psychic abilities, and a lot of people are very psychic, but because they've never practiced it or even have a context for it, they just don't even know that they have that. So it's always incredible to me, the people that come into my classes and they're like, I'm just kind of curious, just kind of wanted to check it out. And then we start to do training, and they're super, super psychic. Like, they could be a professional psychic if they wanted, not necessarily that they need to do that. But if you do have abilities and you tap into it, it's like this incredible resource. Like, I manifest wild and incredible things, like, in a good way. And people, I think, are constantly like, how did you do that? Like, and it's because I can work on this level. Like, I'm not just doing the, like, oh, what are you supposed to do in order to get that outcome? So, like, as an example, I've been on, Will Ferrell's podcast, or on Burgundy podcast. I've, done a lot of media. I've worked with celebrities, and normally when we're not in the shutdown, I travel all the time because I love to travel. So I've been able to just be like, what lifestyle do I want? Who do I want to connect with? And just really create that through intent and then psychic and intuitive work. And I believe that everyone can do that, at least to a degree, with training and practice.
That's amazing. That was the question I was going to ask you too. Do you believe that everyone has these abilities? That's really interesting to me, that someone could have such a strong ability and not know it. That surprises me.
Imagine someone that has innate, incredible ability to be a painter, but they've never held a paintbrush. Of course, how would they know that they could paint?
Mhm.
They've never been given the tools to do it. And depending on what your abilities are, so for example, I'm clairvoyant. So in many cases, like, it's so clear, like, I'm seeing something, other people don't see it or whatever, like that, but that's definitely something that is outside of me. But let's say you're an empath, or you're claircognizant. So claircognizant is when you just know, like, you just have a knowing. If someone asks you how, you can't explain it, you just know something to be the case. So let's say you're claircognizant and you don't necessarily realize, oh, that's a psychic ability. You're just like, I just know that, but if you tap into it and you learn to talk to, those that are giving you information spiritually and in the spiritual realm, then you can tap into it even more. So a lot of people just kind of naturally navigate, but they haven't really practiced or honed their abilities. And the same thing with being an empath. A lot of people that are empaths, and an empath is someone who feels energies and emotions from outside their body, in their body. A lot of empaths may have a sense that some of these things are not theirs, but
Mhm.
when they start to do training, it's like shocking what they have picked up. And actually, I think being an empath is one of the most powerful psychic gifts, even though a lot of people might not think of it as a psychic gift, because you can't lie with energy and emotion,
Mm.
right? Someone can create illusion. Someone can put a smile on their face and act happy, but if they're miserable inside, as an empath, you will feel it. Or they can look like nice and friendly, and then, they have like really horrible intentions. You can feel it. So I think a lot of it is just understanding the different ways that these gifts can manifest, and then knowing that if you start to get to know your own abilities better, then amazing things can happen. But yeah, a lot of people just have no idea because they've just never even thought about it, and no one in their family or circle, has had any reason to explore it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is it possible if you're claircognizant, but you want to be clairvoyant or clairaudient, can you then develop those other abilities?
I think it is like a muscle. So yes, again, some people just have very natural ability in that area, but yes, it's with practice. A lot of people can develop that um, to varying degrees. So I think it's like many other abilities, whether athletics or artistic abilities, that not everyone's going to be Picasso or a world class pianist or whatever. But with practice, we all have some that we can tap into. And a lot of it is just the practice, the intention, and then just the patience. Because for example, with clairvoyance, even though I'm extremely clairvoyant and was growing up, when I started to learn it, it was harder to do it on purpose. Like when it would come in when I was a child, it would just come in and I had no control over it. It just like it was there, it wasn't. It just was, not anything I could purposefully use. And so even those who have strong abilities, sometimes it can feel hard when you're learning how to tap into it kind of at will. So just I'm just saying that because sometimes it takes a bit of patience if you want to develop some of these things, because it is more subtle, and a lot of it is about us learning to trust what we're getting even when it's not so strong. Like, when I look at you, you look very clear, but when you're learning to use your clairvoyance, your vision, your psychic vision, it can feel a little hazy, or it's just like an impression, and then the more you trust it and go with it, then the clearer it gets.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I have a friend who had, similar experiences to you growing up, and she did intentionally shut it off. It
Very
scared
common.
her, and
Yeah.
she was afraid of like bringing harm into her home to her loved ones. And what do you say to someone who has such a gift, right? But is afraid and shuts it down?
Well, first of all, I completely understand. I did it, so clearly, and it's a very common thing for those with abilities that are untrained to do that, because we get overwhelmed. And this is why, if you have abilities, it's so important to have psychic and spiritual boundaries. And again, if you don't have training, you probably won't even know what that is or how to enforce them. But I believe our minds, our lives, and our energy fields are very much like a garden. So if you think about just a garden or a patch of land that you get, if you don't do anything to cultivate it, it's just there's just going to be weeds and random things, but it's not going to be like an orchard or like strawberry plants or lots of flowers. You have to really cultivate that garden. And so psychically, spiritually, you need to clear out what you don't want, the weeds, and like plant whatever you want to have in your garden, psychically and spiritually. So I feel like angels and other light beings are these, the flowers or the fruits or whatever it is that you want in your garden. But the weeds just show up. And the weeds, psychically, spiritually, to me, are like entities that are kind of parasitic, and a lot of them feed on fear, anxiety, anger, etc. And they're like parasites, and they don't need to be invited in, right? They just show up. So we have to learn how to protect our space, how to have energy boundaries. So most people, psychically, energetically, spiritually, have literally no boundaries, which would be like, you don't even have a house, or if you have a house, there's no door in the house and anyone can come in. Like,
Mhm.
we are very taught, like, okay, well, this is what you do to protect yourself in the physical realm, and you need to learn how to do that in the energetic, psychic, and spiritual realm. But we're not taught this. So this is very common for people with psychic abilities who haven't been taught how do I uh, you know have what I want in my life spiritually and not what I don't want. And they get overwhelmed and they shut down. So I completely understand it. Again, I did it. But when you're doing that, not only are you shutting out the dark stuff that can feel scary, but you're not allowing the good stuff to come in. And on top of that, it's not really effective, even though it might feel kind of effective, because that stuff is kind of there still energetically interacting with you, even if you're not sensing it so clearly. What's more like happening is people are kind of psychically putting on like a blindfold. They're like, I don't want to see that. That's scary.
Yeah.
But when you put on a blindfold, everything's still there. It's not gone. You're just not sensing it anymore. So that's what a lot of psychics do. And that's what I did. Instead of like, oh, this is there. How do I shift that, clear it out, you know, change the situation? So I understand why people do that, but I highly encourage anyone who's had these abilities either now or as a child to learn how to have psychic boundaries so that they can tap into the really beneficial aspects of their gifts instead of just being in that place of fear of the things that they don't know how to protect themselves from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple times that during your journey, there was a period of time where your health really suffered. And in my experience as a mental health professional, as a psychologist, I have seen that a lot when people are out of alignment, when people
Yeah.
are denying their emotions, when they're cut off from some part of them. And I often say, if you don't deal with it, you will get sick. I really believe that, and I've seen it happen time and time again. So, I just appreciate you bringing that up because I think that's an important point for people, and it doesn't have to be because you're ignoring a psychic ability. It could be because you're in the wrong job, or you didn't deal with trauma, or you're not facing a bad relationship, right? There's all these different factors that, when we're not honest with ourselves, can manifest them physically. And as you said, it's like it gets louder and louder. It's like you're not paying attention to me. So it's a cold,
Yeah.
and then it's this, and then it's that, until you can end up pretty sick.
Absolutely. I think our bodies are one of the first ways that our intuition is communicating with us. And when we don't listen, it's like these problems start to develop. And when we don't listen even more, it gets stronger and stronger. So, yeah, it could be that there's your body is just literally telling you something's off. And it could be literally like you have mold in your house, or it could be, you know, again, bad relationship, bad job. By the way, if you have mold, you're probably in some kind of emotionally toxic situation. Just feeling to say that as well. But it is interesting when people have these like serious health crises. A lot of times there is an underlying psychic or spiritual aspect to it. And there's something called shaman sickness. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't actually.
So this is something that's talked about in various indigenous cultures that, if you are meant to be a shaman and you're not on your path, you will get sick. And if you don't listen, eventually you'll die. And then something I've seen from the psychic perspective once I got my training is that, you know, we are here for a sole purpose. Literally, like we came here to learn things and to teach things. And we're always learning something and we're always teaching something. And what those things are vary as we develop as a soul. But if we came here like on a mission and we're not accomplishing that mission, then we start over. And what that means is we die. So to put it quite, bluntly, um, that this is important for us to pay attention and also the lessons we learn. It's not like you get out of it, even if it's hard or painful, like we're resisting something. It's not like, well, if I just avoid it long enough, I don't have to do that. We all have to do it. It's just a matter of when. And the longer we wait, the longer we resist, the harder it gets. So there's a lot of people that are, for example, resisting speaking, using their voice, or enforcing boundaries, or using their intuition, and then they get ill, and then there's an opportunity to turn that around. Or if not, then maybe your soul kind of like, okay, we need to start over.
Mm.
And I also encourage people not to fear death at the same time, because it's amazing on the other side. And I feel like this whole pandemic is bringing up so much fear, and that a lot of this is about like the catharsis of moving through that fear, because I believe that almost everything we want is on the other side of fear. Love, beauty, abundance, success, all the things, is when we can move through that fear and not let it have a hold over us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the fear is the most intense right before we walk through it to what we want. It
Absolutely. It is.
escalates, and you have to just persist and believe, because it's right on the other side.
Fear, yeah, fear and resistance, which can often be fear kind of masked. There's a book I reference quite a bit because I think it's so powerful. It's called An Actor's Life by Jenna Fisher. And Jenna Fisher is an actress she was in the American version of The Office, and she's done a lot of different things. But right before we're about to have a massive breakthrough, we often are just like I'm done. I don't want to do this. It's hard. I give up. And she talks about that, where she'd been a working actress in Hollywood for about 10 years, had, work. It's not that she wasn't working, but she hadn't had that like big success that she wanted. And so after 10 years, she's like, this is frustrating. It's not working. She went to her manager agent. She said, I'm quitting. I'm just over this. And they both were like, you're crazy. You have to keep going. And thankfully she listened. And it was literally right after that that she got the Office
Yeah.
gig. And I think that happens for a lot of us, that when we're so close, that's when that message becomes so strong. Like, just stop, give in, give up, just like do something different. And those of us who continue moving forward, that's when we get those big rewards. But it's so hard at the end. So if you're having one of those times, just don't give up. Listen to your intuition, but at the same time know that it's often when we're really just persistent that we get those really big breakthroughs.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to comment that I've been getting like surges of chills as we talk today, which is always a
Amazing.
cool experience.
Yeah, I feel like when we get kind of goosebumps or chills, that's like it's when there's this kind of spiritual resonance, and it's our body kind of being like, oh yes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I could probably talk to you all day, Laura, but I'm going to be respectful of your time, and I'm sure we'll continue this conversation. Any last words you have for our audience?
Yeah, if you're listening to this, I feel like it's not an accident that if there's something for you here, feel free to reach out. I offer these group psychic classes, readings if you want some just deep tapping into your life and what may be in or out of alignment. And then I also have, 8 different books on these various topics. So that's another great way to explore. They're all on Amazon, on my website. My website is healingpowers.net. And just a kind of a closing message is, we're so much more powerful than we think. And just the importance of recognizing that and not believing the false messages that we're getting about what's possible or not possible, that we're powers or there's nothing that we can do. I think we are powerful beyond measure, and our limitations are really because of our perceptions about ourselves. And our
Mm,
perceptions are based on what other people have experienced. Like, there's all these periods in history, like when motorized vehicles were invented, there were literally people that thought people would die if they went faster than 30 miles an hour. Like, literally, it was just debate. Can humans literally go that fast before, and now we laugh because it's like, well, of course we're fine, but so much of our perception about what we think we can do is based on the collective of what everyone thinks is possible. And we can just blow right past all that if we just allow ourselves to.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I am going to put Laura's information in the comments so you'll be able to easily find it. And this recording will obviously continue to be on Facebook as well as YouTube and my website, drdonnamarino.com. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Laura, for coming here. It's been absolutely fascinating to have you on, and I appreciate you sharing your experience of wise leadership with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And I always love, especially helping people tap into their own intuition. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.